In this video, we will take a look at Self-Portrait on the Borderline Between Mexico and the United States by Frida Kahlo. In it, we will take a journey looking at the physical reproduction of a painting by Frida, and in doing so, we will determine and explore the value of recreating an artist's work and placing that work in the context of the artist's life and times. In this picture, you see Frida standing on the border between her idea of Mexico and her idea of the United States. The act of mimicking this painting first moves the ideas in the work from the two-dimensional to the third dimension. The act of copying in this case is not a strict recreation, but more of a meditation on the choice of objects. In it, we are trying to mimic Frida's painting with what's on hand, and it forces you to think about why she depicted the objects that she did. What was her process in choosing those objects, and what was her context? Frida never saw her paintings as surrealist. She said, "I do not paint dreams or nightmares. I paint my own reality." Frida also, as an artist, was very conscious of her appropriation of material culture in service to her artistic and political agendas. She painted this picture in the 3-year period during which she lived and traveled with her husband, Diego Rivera, in the United States. Frida was incredibly conscious of her ideas of Mexico as a nation and what it meant to her as a person. Her body became a vessel for her political commentary in many ways. For example, she changed the date of her birth from 1907 to 1910 to coincide with the date of the Mexican Revolution because she so identified the utopian ideals of the revolution and so desired to embody them. And Frida's work is not to be interpreted as a direct representation of Mexican nationalism, but rather to be interpreted as a complex compilation of a form of Mexicanness. In the act of recreating this particular painting, you are limited by what your own personal context is. So in the context of this Fordham apartment, you're not going to have an Aztec temple lying around, but you do have brown paper bags which mimic the brown and texture of the Aztec temple in the background of Frida's space. You're also not going to have a moon and a sun, but you can print them out with your printer. On the other side of Frida, you see smokestacks. These smokestacks say Ford on them. And once again, this is Frida commenting on the pollution and exploitation that America causes Mexico. Frida was always using the indigenous culture and the visual cues on the American side as an anti-imperialist political statement. So with these smokestacks visible and with the industrialized metal buildings, the harshness that is visible in this landscape, the lack of life visible on the United States side, I tried to recreate it with modern objects that I had on hand. So objects of metal, objects of plasticity, objects that are harsh, and while not the three-dimensional buildings that she depicts, we see in them the same sort of materialism that is shown in the United States side. And so there's a move then from the United States side over to that of the Mexican side. Now, I do not have a pile of rocks in my dorm room, nor a pile of earth, but nor do I have an Aztec tomb figurine, but you may do. This Matryoshka measuring cup doll, which is not in any way similar in function, but is a visual cue, if nothing else. Frida, in choosing this particular Aztec objects, was showing the ideal of a culture she was going for, one that embodied a heroic indigenous past of a socialistic and communistic society that the Aztecs were perceived to be by her and other Mexicans of her time. And here again, we have a disconnect, an irony between what Frida was reaching for in her depiction of the flowers and the life in her piece, but recreated in this Fordham dorm with fake flowers, with dead plants and with one last living aloe plant. So you're moving from Frida's beautiful, fertile Mexican ground to a cold harshness found in America. America, in this painting, and how Frida depicts it, shows that the U.S. was blind in its movements towards the modernity and industrial progress, and that it was a parasite and exploiting Mexico in many ways. And so you have all of these metal works and all of these wires that are reaching over to the Americans, from the American side to the Mexican side. And here, finally, you start to get the full visual of the work. You have the person portraying Frida getting up on this box and standing on it with a flag and a cigarette in her hand, standing on the border between the US and this representation of Mexico. And it makes you wonder how Frida would feel now about the border between US and Mexico, and how in many ways the US has in fact exploited Mexico and has polluted it, and what the borderline now looks like. So, as discussed in this video, we took a journey looking at the physical reproduction of a painting by Frida and discussed how significant objects are to learning about the context in which they are found. And if the artist is talented and has a strong voice like Frida, those objects become a way of speaking visually. The act of copying the painting forces you to think about the choice of objects and their cultural context. In working at this cultural reaction at a dorm room at Fordham, you perhaps gain more insight into the specifics of the here and now of the dorm location, as opposed to learning about the culture of Frida's US versus Mexico. Much like Frida, we build from the material world around us of what we know. Our space and our artistic expression and our interpretation is informed mainly by our context.